This video is going to have a lot of fucking bleeps.
I'm laughing on the outside, crying on the inside, 'cause I'm still in love with you.
Don't judge the editing on this video. I put a lot of thought into this one. End of the Effing World is one of the most underrated shows I can think of. It's a light-hearted, dark drama with some added comedy, and it's genuinely one of the most beautiful shows I've ever seen. Ever notice how all the stories I love are about mental health? Weird coincidence. The story the show tells is a very personal one. It's only ever focused on the personal sides of the two main characters. It's the story of two teenagers who hate their life, so they decide to run away together. Sounds fairly basic, but did I mention that one is trying to murder the other one?
Walking all day with my mouth on fire, that's what I've gotta do. Trying to get talking to you.
The dynamic between James and Alyssa is never not interesting. They lie all the time about how they feel, and because of that, the relationship between them is only based on their actions. But individually, it is only ever focused on their emotions and or feelings. James has been living with depression since a very young age due to the horrific suicide of his mother, and he's sadly misunderstood and self-identified himself as a psychopath. And Alyssa's mother is going through a period of her life where she believes that what other people think of her is more important than how she feels. And of course, Alyssa, being her daughter, is being taught to follow that horrific attitude by her mother. Notice how both their backstories include them losing their mother figure in some way. Alyssa refuses to give in to that lifestyle, and so she runs away with James, who has secretly been using his leftover and built-up feelings to murder animals, and he recently has decided to kill a person. He treats his animal murder like self-harm. It feels to him like it's letting go of the built-up anger and that feeling of nothingness, which is why later on, when he has feelings, he can't even kill an injured dog. Alyssa and James both pretend to fall in love with each other. Alyssa is at the breaking point and needs a drastic lifestyle change. James is her excuse to change. And James thought she would be a good murder victim. But James does begin to connect with her destructive attitude.
Okay, sorry, you can't use language like that, otherwise I'm going to have to ask you and your boyfriend to leave.
I will have a great big banana shit with extra cherries.
He's somebody who has taught himself to feel nothing. Telling somebody to off must feel like a dream to him. After she was done being defensive, the first time Alyssa connects with James is after she hears about the death of his mother. Like I've mentioned before, they've both lost their mother figures. It's like shared trauma. She begins to understand that he's hurt. From this point onwards, they're still incredibly defensive, but they feel safe enough to ask intimate questions. You can tell the difference between when she's asking fake intimate questions and when she's telling truthfully personal ones, just from the tone of her voice.
Have you ever eaten a before? James?
Yeah?
You cuddle me.
James is not used to showing feelings. I mean, he hasn't felt anything since the death of his mother. So he's always looking at Alyssa to know how to feel. Always asking her questions. In some scenes, it feels like he's mimicking her to impress her.
Seatbelt.
Seatbelts. Seatbelt.
Seatbelts.
Yes, James is happier, or at least he's not feeling empty, but he's not healthier. The reason for that is because he doesn't know who he is. He's been a ghost just watching life go by. Now that he's actually trying to be a part of life, the only way he knows how is to be like the people that he's been watching. Both Alyssa and James are still incredibly unstable, together and individually. It's only after the murder when things begin to fit into place for the two of them, but we will get to that part later. first hint we get of Alyssa wanting to run away is when she starts ranting to everybody about how boring everyone is. James gives a very interesting reply.
Well, they've got money, they feel safe.
At this point, his character never really says anything, meaning this sentence is a lot more important than people seem to realise. It is insanely overlooked. Alyssa immediately rejects his comment, which is interesting.
Are you boring too?
James's comment immediately connects two concepts: freedom and money. These two concepts dance around each other for the rest of the show. A lot of the show, in fact, is a reply to James's comment. For example, the first safe haven they find themselves in is a rich man's house, which is of course where they find the tapes. These tapes are just left in a drawer while the owner is presumably on holiday, meaning he feels very safe. But is that due to his money? The second safe haven they find themselves in seems to give us that answer. It is the complete opposite of the first house. I wouldn't say a poor man's home, that's not the vibe, but he doesn't exactly have any money, let's be honest. The man who lives there, Alyssa's father, seems safe on the surface, but then you start to realise how unstable he really is. Both homes turn out to be the most dangerous places they find themselves in. James's comment can of course be up for interpretation though. Do you feel they were safer in the rich house before finding the tapes, or do you feel they were safer at Alyssa's father's house? Also, why did Alyssa push back James's comment? As a child, her father constantly told her that corporations are pure evil, and because of that she's always been very against anybody with money. You can argue that's because money gives freedom, and she always seems to reject freedom, despite it being what she desperately wants.
Guess what freedom smells like?
What?
Cow.
It's like she wants to win, but doesn't know what to fight against. So she finds and blames all her problems on one thing. Starts to fight it, wins, but doesn't get what she wants. So she just moves on to the next fight. The first time this pattern breaks is after the murder. Alyssa is rightfully panicking and begins to blame all her problems she's facing on James. So she leaves him. But after a while, she begins to realise that he's not the cause of her problems. So she waves her white flag and holds his hand. Alyssa always self-identifies as destructive, but she does break that character with James. You can always tell by her rolling her eyes. Anyway, it's time to properly talk about the impact of the murder. Interestingly, is what properly starts their relationship, and the show is very self-aware of that. The pool of blood pouring out from the dead body even becomes heart-shaped. Alyssa becomes extremely confused on who to trust and why. She becomes understandably scared of the boy who just murdered somebody in front of her without a second thought, so she slowly cares for James less and less.
I think it's fair to say that my disguise wasn't as effective as Alyssa's.
Until she finally snaps and runs away from him. Alyssa is James's crutch, so suddenly he's being thrown into the real world and being forced to find out who he is. Because James is now alone, this is the first time he has ever allowed himself to properly reflect on himself and what happened. Big moments of his life start to become mixed as he's trying to find his way through this maze of emotions and feelings, something that he has no experience with dealing at all. When he was 9, he self-harmed to feel something.
One day, I put my hand in it.
But now he self-harms to stop feeling everything.
I was never Alyssa's protector. She was mine.
He is stuck in between the two extremes and can't find a healthy middle. This is when he starts to realise that Alyssa was his middle ground of feelings. She was the one healing him. And now he knows that he can start to heal himself with her help. Meanwhile, Alyssa begins to reflect on her destructive character and realises that it is just that. A character. An impulsive character, yes, but she is not that character. And James is the only place where she's happy to let go of that character. They both realise that they are and feel safer together.
As the hours passed, I realised that I felt different. Sort of new.
I think I'm starting to feel a bit more like myself. Sometimes I think I feel more like myself with James than I do on my own.
After they find each other again, they have the first real reason to lean on each other and to properly care for each other. From now on, they stand up for each other constantly, and they stop lying to each other. Like, I think this is the first real moment when you realise how much they've been lying.
I'm really scared. I'm really scared.
Honestly, I would say that their relationship doesn't really change from now until James's sacrifice, which we'll get to in a bit. What I love about the murder is how it spins Alyssa and James's relationship out of control, and it gives us two brand new characters who are also obviously struggling with relationships. The detectives, Terry and Eunice. Eunice? I think it's Eunice. I don't know. Couldn't be bothered to check. Eunice is very obviously in love with Terry, but Terry constantly rejects a proper relationship. Eunice keeps trying to get Terry's attention, but then she slowly realises how judgmental she is and how she constantly jumps to conclusions because she's lazy at her job.
Well, he's had the knife since he was 13 years old. I had an air rifle when I was 10. Has Terry left?
Eventually, Eunice lets go of Terry to help James and Alyssa, breaking away from their destructive relationship.
For all you know, we might be dead by tomorrow.
One of the most interesting things that shows how separated they were before the murder is how the camera treats them. The camera literally separates them down the middle, and their individual thoughts are separated into different shots. For the most of it, they're always sitting apart from each other to show how different and unfitting they are for each other at that point. And what I love about this TV adaptation is how they kept the inner thoughts of the two main characters, and they kept it so it jumps between the two of them. You see their action, they speak to the other character, and then it shows us their inner thoughts of what they really think. It's a really simple yet amazing method to separate actions and feelings while giving us some amazing and beautifully placed dialogue. Anyway, back to the story. Alyssa always fantasizes about what's outside the town. She has this huge feeling that she's missing everything and it's just her town that's boring. But what's interesting is after they run away, what they see of the world is the least interesting part. There's no moment where they actually like where they are. I don't remember them even referencing it. It's just all dodgy looking places and boring people. Even the stuff that they steal turns out to be broken. And that is very obviously on purpose. It's subtle, but on purpose. It shows that the issue isn't Alyssa's current lifestyle, it's just her attitude towards that lifestyle. And that is something that doesn't change throughout the show. Series 2 fix that. After they run away together, she realises that the world is just generally boring, so all she has is James, which is why she panics and searches for her father, who is the only comforting thought that she's had in presumably years. James has no interest in the world at any point, so it's useless looking at him for this topic, but Alyssa becomes as uninterested as he is. It's a really interesting and subtle transition to watch. Speaking of transitions,
Have you ever loved someone with all of your heart, sharing all their joy?
by the way, I took my cardigan off because it's too warm. Normally I would open the window, but that messes up the audio, so you gotta suffer for your art, am I right? YouTubers. In the comic, James's dad is just genuinely a bad person, but that is very different in the show. He does have his questionable moments, that shows he's not a good man, but whatever he says or does isn't deserving of James's attitude. It feels very off, especially since James doesn't care about anything at this point. But one very specific small moment made me change my mind on that completely.
How you feeling? Better? Good. What are you two doing today, then?
Can we go feed the ducks?
Ah, ducks. Sounds good.
No, James, I said, not today.
Come on, you can manage ducks, can you? Be good for you to get out.
This makes him the reason why James's mother killed herself. He was pushing her so much. I doubt he knew what he was doing, but it made him the cause of her death. And the father knows that, and is always trying to distract himself from it. And I think James knows that as well, but he desperately wants to blame himself. But he knows what the real reason is. I mean, it happened right in front of him, and that is why James really wanted to punch his father. After James runs away, the father stops distracting himself. I don't know if that means he knew why James hit him, because he didn't seem to distract himself using James in the past. This is why I think Series 2 is going to be focused on the parents and their relationships with their children, and why they were as toxic as the children themselves. There is just so much unfinished business and unanswered questions surrounding James's father. I cannot wait. I'll quickly talk about Series 2 in a bit, but first, let's talk about that ending. The first context we ever get of James's sacrifice is at the very start of the final episode. It tells us that he's alone, and we assume that if he's alone, then Alyssa must either be in big trouble, or she's dead. After we see this, the episode teases us.
I think it is okay. We've got like our whole lives.
Throughout the show, it has this theme of, if you don't like your life, then scream f*** it and change it all. It's something that James and Alyssa constantly inspire in people, but that attitude always ends badly for that person. The show is constantly telling us that this attitude is always destructive. It's always been telling us how their relationship will end with a backstabbing, just like Frodo, just like Eunice. The more I say Eunice, the least it sounds like an actual word. James's final words are short.
I've just turned 18. And I think I understand what people mean to each other.
But it ties up his story in a neat little bow. His story has always been about relationships. It's about somebody who has no idea what's destructive, abusive, and kind in relationships, and he's having to learn on the go with somebody who is actually destructive, and it turns into a sort of feedback loop. He learns from her destructive attitude, she bounces destructive attitude back, he bounces destructive attitude back, she bounces destructive... You get the point. The cycle does become healthier later on, but it never breaks. Alyssa even persuades herself that the murder was a good thing because of James's attitude. As soon as James realizes that he loves her, he knows that the only way to save her is to backstab her, to end the feedback loop.
Sorry.
The show is told through James's perspective from this moment.
What people mean to each other.
I give us f***ing medals or something, they probably will.
They didn't.
It only ever bounces to and from Alyssa's thoughts. He's looking back on who he was and who he became. He's not just sacrificing himself, but also Alyssa's trust. But he still decided that this is the right thing to do, because now he finally understands what relationships really are. I said earlier that the finale's beginning shot tells us that Alyssa's either in big trouble or dead. And what I love about this ending is how it completely flips that on us. Then, of course, that's all, folks. Up until I wrote this video, I was hoping that James would be kept alive for a series 2. But now I've changed my mind. His story is over. But there are still so many loose ends in the show. We have no idea what Alyssa will do with her life. We don't even know if she'll go along with James's final plan. And what about James's father? I said earlier how unfinished his story is. The show was designed for a series 2. That's why they gave it that ending. I think it's ridiculous the amount of people saying that there's nothing else to tell, because that's not the case at all. There's just nothing else to tell about James. If you enjoyed me trying to be analytical, then why not like or even subscribe? When you're a small channel like me, any kind of support really boosts my motivation, and it generally does make me happy to see people subscribe. This sort of video is something I haven't done before. I'm just sort of testing it out, so don't be too harsh. Thank you for watching till the end though, it does mean a lot. Bye bye.